And now it's my honor to introduce you the big show. Bishop Michael Barber. He was a Navy chaplain, deployed multiple times to theaters of combat, an Oxford University student and tutor, appointed Bishop of Oakland in 2013, former chair of the Ed Committee for USCCB. This is a big deal. High school teacher for 5 years, Jesuit priest. Welcome, Bishop Barber. Thanks for joining us.
I don't want to break it. I can't afford to pay for it.
I got you.
Sorry. Are we good? There we are. Thank you. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. And it's very nice to be here. I'm very impressed with this campus. First time I've been here. Although I was taught by the Ursuline nuns of Santa Rosa when I was a student at Our Lady of Loretto School in Novato, where I made my first Holy Communion. And when I remember about the nuns, at that time they were full habit and everything, but we didn't call them sister, we called them mother. My first grade teacher was Mother Florence. Mother Mary William I had in the 3rd grade, Mother Rita, 4th grade. It was curious because everywhere else you could say sister, but with their order, they were called mother, but they were excellent teachers. And I believe their mother house is here or very, very close by. Some of you may be first year teachers. I hope it's going okay. My first year teaching was the hardest year of my life. In the Jesuit formation, after you do novitiate and you do juniorate and you do philosophy, you have to teach high school for at least 3 years. I was given a 4th year. And my first year, all boys school, Loyola High School in Los Angeles. I had 3 sections of sophomore world history, 2 sections of seniors for California history. The seniors were all taller than I was. I had not started shaving yet, and I'm trying to keep control in the classroom. But I tell you, it was the best challenge, but it was a very nice coaching swimming and water polo. In the summers between, I was sent to Taiwan to teach at St. Ignatius High School in Taipei, all boys Chinese high school. My first day in the classroom, all the boys stood up and in unison bowed down like this. So we need that in America. It was so nice. And later they would invite me to their homes for an elaborate banquets that their mothers and sisters had prepared. And I said, why do you treat me like this? The banquet, the respect in the class. And one of my students said to me, Mr. Barber, we have a proverb in Chinese. If a person teaches you for a day, they are like your mother and father for life. Thank you for being in the educational ministry of the church. That is so true. Long after the kids maybe forget the English lessons or the science or the math or whatever, they remember you. And I know, having taught so many years ago, the number of students I'm still in touch with. You have the opportunity to make a lifetime impression. You may know it, you may not know it, but it's a very noble profession. Thank you. I also want to talk a little bit now about why is John Henry Newman a doctor of the church? Because his theological and spiritual teachings are a model for the whole church and not just for England, not just the local place where he was from. I'm going to go quickly over some of his greatest contributions, the theology of the church. First is his theory of development of doctrine. It's a book that he wrote that is unfinished. He wrote it to answer all of his own objections to why I am not a Catholic. He wrote it toward the end of his Anglican career. He was born in 1801 in London, went up to Oxford, became a student, almost failed his final examinations at Oxford while he was a student. Let me tell you a little about the Oxford system, if you're not familiar. It's one of the best educational systems, Oxford and Cambridge, in that there are no classes. There are no classes. When you go there, you've already finished the equivalent of junior college when you go to sixth form high school, which is like JC. And by the time you go to university, you already have your major in mind, and that's what you study, full stop. So you can major in modern history, ancient philosophy, science, medicine, law, right from when you step in there too. So if they don't have classes, how do you learn? Well, what they do is at the end of 3 or 4 years, you take a week's worth of final exams, all day, every day for a week, and then the exams are corrected, and the results of your exam for your degree are published in the London Times. So the whole world gets to see how you do, okay? Better for worse. And so the means of instruction is by individual tutorial. It's very expensive and very exclusive, but your senior tutor at your college, if you're going to do a degree in modern history, he will select tutors for you throughout your 3 years, and then you go to your tutor. The tutor gives you a subject for an essay. He says, read these books, write on this question, and you come back in a week, and you sit there in front of him in his study, and you read your essay, and he tears it apart. And that's how you learn to get ready for those exams at the end. And the prestige of your college rises or falls on the results of the exams. When Newman went up, he was accepted at Trinity College. He was a very good student, very hard worker, all that. But when he had exams, he was terrified. He almost had a breakdown. And he passed barely with a C, the American equivalent of a C. Not very promising. But then he wanted to sit the exam to become a fellow, to become a professor. Imagine you get a C, but he was smart enough and he studied for those exams and he took a series of exams and was given the equivalent of the Nobel Prize. He was elected a fellow of Oriel College at Oxford. He said, the greatest thing of my life, the thing I wanted the most in life. So he was ordained an Anglican priest at the age of 24. But as he studied more and more the history of the church, read the fathers of the church, he came to see that the Church of England, in which he was ordained, was not part of the one holy Catholic Church. Originally, he thought it was, and then he wrote what was called Tract 90. When you go to Oxford in those days, in order to be admitted and in order to get a degree, you had to publicly profess the 39 Articles of the Church of England. If you couldn't profess those, you couldn't study there. So Catholics were excluded on the one end and Baptists on the other end as being equally heretical to the Church of England, okay? Pretty nice. And so he wrote Tract 90, which said, the 39 Articles can be interpreted in continuity with Catholic doctrine. And that's how he justified staying in the Church of England. Unfortunately, this Tract 90, when he published it, it was attacked and he was censured on all sides by his Church of England. And they said, no, they cannot be interpreted in the light of Catholic doctrine. We are a Protestant church. He resigned as a priest in the Anglican Church. He was pastor and gave his last sermon, but he didn't become Catholic right away because he still had some objections. And when he wrote the book, Development of Doctrine, he argued himself out of those objections. The Protestants had said the Catholic Church is added on to what's in Scripture. They've added things, additions and accretions. And he said, no, these are developments, like a flower that's a bud that then opens up and becomes in full bloom. It's the same flower. It looks a little different, but it is the same flower. And over time, as a bud opens up, you see and appreciate it more. He said the Catholic faith is like that. What was given as a seed by Christ and the apostles takes root, blooms, and continues to bud as the light of human reason and experience and the Holy Spirit is put on that. Long story short, on development of doctrine, one of his greatest contributions, and it's so timely right now. What are we fighting about in the church? You hear some bishops in Europe, even some in America, saying the church needs to redefine its teachings on human sexuality. Maybe same-sex marriage is okay. Yeah, some are saying that, in Germany and other places, because these are developments of doctrine. And other bishops are saying, no, they're not. You have to follow Newman's rules for development of doctrine. And one of the development of doctrine rules is it can't be what it was not. It can't be something different. It has to be. So anyway, I'm just saying it's a huge contribution that we're following. Conscience. Newman is the doctor of conscience. He said your conscience is the primordial vicar of Christ. It's God's voice being echoed within you. And he said it is proof for the existence of God that you have a conscience. And how is that? And he'd say it's very easy. A mother tells her 5-year-old child, you may not have a cookie before dinner. That is forbidden. It'll ruin your appetite. The child knows it is forbidden. It's a sin. It's against the law. When the mother's out of the room, the child gets a chair, climbs up on the chair, opens a cookie jar, gets the cookie, puts the chair back and all that, eats the cookie. Mom doesn't see. But the child feels guilty because he knows someone saw. The voice is the voice of a speaker who is God, the voice of your conscience. So he said conscience leads to proof for the existence of God. Another of Newman's contributions, his famous letter on consulting the faithful in matters of doctrine. Oh, that sounds like our synodality, right? Pope Francis. Very good. When he wrote this, he said it's not just the priests and bishops that are inspired by the Holy Spirit, but the whole people of God who have been anointed at their baptism and confirmation. And he said when the whole church is in harmony with the bishops, priests, then we have confirmation of a doctrine or of a teaching. He was delayed to Rome for heresy because those thought he was being heretical, thought, well, you're putting lay people at the same level as a pope and the cardinal that's head of the doctrine of the faith. And he said, no, I'm not. He said in his letter on consulting the faithful, the word consulting has 2 meanings. And this is the key to his subtlety, his brilliance. A patient consults a doctor in a different way than the doctor consults the patient. Isn't that true? Doctor, I hurt. Doctor, and I go because he knows more and he's going to tell me why I'm hurting and he will fix it. But in order to do that, he has to consult me. When did it start hurting? Does it hurt over here, over here? What does the pain feel like? What have you been eating? Consultation is going on, but it's not exactly in the same way. And if you can grasp that subtlety, then you can begin to see how Newman would approve of synodality in the church today, or not. We had a huge seminar at Notre Dame University for 100 bishops. We brought some of the best theologians from around the world, from England, Australia, to speak to us on these subtleties in synodality and consulting the faithful, what it means. Each and every one of them quoted Cardinal Newman in defense of their position. It was excellent. It's what we needed to hear. Cardinal Newman, on trusting the church. They asked him once, do you believe in transubstantiation? When the body and the bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ. He said, before I was a Catholic, I did not believe in it when I was an Anglican. I believed in a presence of Christ in the Eucharist, but I don't know how. But once I became a Catholic and believed that the Roman Catholic Church was the pillar and ground of truth, the oracle of God, the one true fold of the Redeemer, I had no trouble believing it at all. I trusted the church, that the church was guided by the Holy Spirit to explain the scriptures to us, and I could easily accept it. Newman was a philosopher. His most famous book in philosophy is The Grammar of Assent. I don't even want to begin to talk about it right now. It was so influential that the Jesuit philosopher Bernard Lonergan took that as his starting point for his works in epistemology. Newman was a poet and a novelist. One of his most famous poems was Lead Kindly Light, the Pillar of Cloud, which he wrote after he recovered from a near fatal illness that he had when he was visiting Sicily. The Dream of Gerontius. He wrote that whole opera, of which the most famous part is Praise to the Holiest in the Height. We sing it in some of our churches. He wrote novels. He was a master of English prose. He wrote his autobiography, the Apologia Pro Vita Sua, to defend himself from calumny of an Anglican minister that accused him of being a Roman Catholic plant in the Anglican Church for many years, secretly being a Catholic and pretending he was an Anglican to try and move the Anglican. And so he wrote the Apologia in 2 months at a standing desk to prove that his religious views changed over time and how they changed. I have a first edition copy here, the Apologia from 1864 in the middle there, the brown book, if you want to look at it after. He was a great preacher. He was appointed the university preacher at St. Mary the Virgin Church for all the 35 colleges of Oxford University. His sermons are published in the famous Parochial and Plain Sermons and other ones. They're still really good. He was a pastor of souls, pastor of St. Mary the Virgin, then at Littlemore. Then he became a Catholic in 1845, exactly halfway through his life, and he went on to live until he was 90. So 45 years as a Protestant, 45 years as a Catholic. And as he said, Catholics did not make me a Catholic. Oxford made me a Catholic. There were no Catholics in Oxford. There were no priests. There were no parishes. He never met, very rarely, maybe once in his life in passing. It just wasn't done. It was not a friendly country or place for Catholics. So when he argued himself into the Catholic Church, he had to send for an Italian missionary who barely spoke English, that was trying to convert Englishmen in broken English, Father Dominic Barbary, who rode all night outside in this pouring rain to go to Newman's place at Littlemore. And he met Newman. He dried off in front of the fire. Newman started his confession. They went to bed. Newman continued his confession all the next day, and then was baptized and received into the Roman Catholic Church. Newman then went to Rome in order to prepare to be ordained a Roman Catholic priest. The Archbishop of Birmingham sent him to the Jesuits at the Gregorian University. He went to classes for a week, and then the professors told him to please stay home. He knew more than they did, Latin, Greek. He was world famous theologian. So he did private reading, and then in 2 years was ordained a Catholic priest in Rome, said his first mass there. But he had to figure out what kind of priest he was going to be. He didn't want to be a diocesan priest. He thought the Jesuits were too strict for his kind of personality, and he's more freedom loving. So he became an Oratorian of St. Philip Neri, which is an order founded at the same time as the Jesuits in 1500s. A lot of kids pick Philip Neri for their confirmation saint. Here's a kid coming up confirmation, Philip Neri. Why did you pick Philip Neri? He's patron saint of comedians. I say to the boy, are you a wise guy? Yes, Bishop, I am. Okay, that sounds like a very good pick. Okay. But Philip Neri had this Oratorian order, which not only is it still going, it's the only order in the Catholic Church to have doubled in size since Vatican II, and spreading is very attractive. When you join that order, you join just one house, and you remain in that one parish, that one school for your whole life. You don't get transferred around like the Jesuits from LA to San Francisco, wherever. So you really get to know the brothers very, very well. He liked that, he brought that, and he established that order in England where it did not exist in Birmingham, not in London. And then Newman was a great educator, so let's talk a little more about that. He said, education has always been my line. That's the thing he was most proud of, that he wanted to be known for. First, as an Oxford tutor. So he was assigned students that would come for him for instruction. He would give the essays. But he had a big falling out with the provost of Oriel College, because Newman's idea of what a tutor was, a teacher was not just to give them academic preparation, but it was to train the whole person, to look after their spiritual life, their moral life. How are you doing? And you have any problems? He was an ordained Anglican priest as well as a tutor. Most of the other all the tutors were ordained Anglican priests, but they didn't practice. You know, they weren't conducting services or whatever. They were mainly academics. He said, well, if I'm an Anglican priest, I have to care about their souls as well as their minds. And he had a big fight with the provost of Oriel College, who said, no, just give them the information and forget about the rest. He said, I can't do that. Then they didn't give him any more students. He still got paid because he was a fellow for life, but it was worth everything that he lost his tutorials for that. Newman said this, and this is a big takeaway for me, and I hope it will be for you as teachers. He said, personal influence is the primary means of propagating the truth. Your personal influence. Well, why is that important? Because it means that AI can never replace us as teachers. Not a computer screen or a program or any of that stuff. It's the human interaction, he said, it's the primary means of handing on the truth. Meaning our faith, but also meaning the material that you're teaching, but also meaning that you're educating the whole person. This may be a little too harsh, but I'd like to say in public school, they teach math, English, science, things like that. Catholic school, we teach Bob, Mary, Karen, Steve, Helen. Our emphasis is on the person, total emphasis on that person. And so this is really, really important. Spiritual integrity, another aspect of Newman. He left everything he loved when he became a Catholic. He had to resign from the university, resign the Anglican priesthood, resign his income. And he was using his income to support his unmarried sisters and his mother until his mother died. He was at one of the most famous universities in the world. He was well known in all England. He was one of the most famous of all the Anglican preachers of the day. Everyone was buying his books. All that went away when he became a Catholic. And he had no Catholic friends at all. Nobody. For a man who loved friendship, who loved conversation, who loved teaching, he left everything he loved. He had to leave Oxford and went to Birmingham. Okay. As an Orientorian priest, he went to Oxford. He went back to Birmingham, founded this oratory, which is a parish, and then he started his own school there. But before he started his own high school and grammar school, he was invited by the bishops of Ireland to start a Catholic university in Ireland. So he goes over to Ireland, and he gives a series of lectures in the evening, public lectures, on what is a university, what's it going to be about. If we're going to start something, you got to know what it is. And these lectures have been published in Newman's The Idea of a University, classic book. When I became Bishop of Oakland in 2013, on my cell phone, I get a phone call early one morning, and I did not recognize the number. Usually I don't answer those calls, but I answered. And it was Governor Brown, who was then governor. How do you get my number? But he did. He says, what are you doing this morning? And I said, well, I'm having my breakfast. I'll be there in 15 minutes. You know, he comes to my house, he sits at my kitchen table, and he has under his arm a book. I look at, what is the book? Newman's Idea of a University. So we were having a conversation. He puts the book on the table. He says, I want to talk about this. And I said, well, why are you interested in Newman's Idea of a University? He goes, as governor, I'm the chair of the Board of Regents of the University of California system. And he says, none of them know what a university is supposed to be. And this has the answer. Imagine, yeah, imagine. How many governors would say that, you know? So we talked about that. It's still a model on what a university would be. And then when the university, it didn't work out because the Irish bishops would not follow Newman's advice on how to organize it and what it should be. What did they fight over? Here's two examples. One, Newman wanted to appoint a layperson who was a prominent banker and businessman to be the treasurer and, what do you call it, the business administrator, you know, and the Irish bishop said, no, we don't trust a layman to do that, it has to be a priest. You know, and there you go, that's crazy. You want someone who knows money better than anyone else to organize that. So other things, Newman started the university, he lived with the students in the same rooms, he ate his meals with them as they did at Oxford. And in order to keep them from going to pubs, he bought a billiard table and made a recreation room. The Irish bishops were horrified. You shouldn't be playing billiard. Their idea of a university was just like a pre-seminary. You would go to that, and then you would go in the seminary. He said, no, it's education for its own sake. So you can be educated fathers, husbands, you know, that kind of thing. So that didn't work out, so he resigned as president. He came home to Birmingham, and that's when he founded, in 1857, the Oratory School. You saw some pictures of some of the students there. He started it on the grounds of his parish, and it was a boarding school. It was only for boys, which is as it was in those days. There were schools for girls that were separate, conducted by other religious orders. He wanted his oratory school to be different than the existing Catholic schools at the time, like Ampleforth, run by the Benedictines at Ampleforth Abbey, Stonyhurst, run by the Jesuits, you know, all famous Catholic boarding schools, famous for strictness and all that. He didn't want them to be quite as strict. He wanted them to be more pastoral, give the students more freedom, but also responsibility. He had his own vision for what it should be. But they were boarding schools. That's the way it was. And it started young, like around second and third grade. And then it went all the way up through high school. And part of his system was, besides the masters, the teachers, many of whom were priests, the principal was a priest, he also had what was called the dame. It sounds harsh to our ears, the matron, the school mother, a woman who was in charge of the boys when they were eating, sleeping, the clothes, the manners, all the domestic. When they got sick, she was the one in charge when they weren't in the classroom, you know, when they were eating. And a lot of the fathers didn't like that. They thought it should be more Spartan, more like the army, you know, that much more. And he says, no, you need a woman's influence, and she is essential to my vision. He had a big falling out with the priest he had appointed as pastor, and an argument. And the priest said, either she goes or I go. And three other the men teachers said, we're going to quit too, unless you fire the matron. And he said, Newman said, no, she stays. She's essential. So they quit. She stayed. He said, you know, he so believed in her and her contribution. Newman, although he was brilliant and he had this great system for the school and all of that, he made some bad hires, you know. He hired a priest from France that this Mrs. Wooten was very suspicious of. She could smell, you know, she could tell. And this priest from France, it turned out, was going out at night in disguise and going to bars and houses of ill repute and all that. Then he'd come back and clean up and be in the classroom the next day. She didn't care for this at all. The police got onto him, that he ran away, and when they went in his room, they found all his disguises and wigs and fake mustaches and everything. So yeah, Newman hired him. That was not a good hire, you know. It happens, okay? Sometimes it is not a good, but just to show that it was a school like any other school that you're trying to start out with, and you make some of the same mistakes. Okay. Newman's idea of educating the whole person, academic excellence, yes, but also sports, music, drama, and speech. Newman attended the cricket matches on feast days, even as a cardinal. He played the violin in the school orchestra. He wrote an annual play in Latin that the students performed and memorized the lines in Latin. He gave catechism lessons himself once a week on Sunday afternoon. He said, I want to make sure I have my own personal contact with the boys, and that is so important, and he did it. His school attracted some of the best and brightest. J.R.R. Tolkien sent his sons there to the Newman's Oratory School. J.R.R. Tolkien himself, when his own father died, his mother brought him to the oratory and asked one of the priests to be his guardian, to be his ward. So there's a strong Tolkien connection with the Birmingham Oratory and the Oratory School. Newman wanted to meet the wishes of Catholic parents, especially Catholics that were converts to the faith who had gone to Eton and Harrow, the two most famous English public schools which still exist today, and have that on the Catholic side. And he wanted the spirituality of St. Philip Neri to permeate, which is joy and happiness and kindness. So his school is still operating today. It's moved they needed to have playing fields and expand and all that, so it quickly outgrew its campus. And they're now at a huge estate outside Reading. When you play Monopoly, you have Reading Railroad, okay? It's outside the town of Reading in a huge grassy estate. They have boarders, but they also have day students. They've only admitted girls in the last 10 years. In 1995, I gave a retreat at the Oratory School, to one of the classes, the boys. And I was, oh, thank you, sir. That's very nice, sir. May I go to confession, sir? They come up. And in the evening, I stayed over a couple-day retreat. The headmaster said, would you mind leading the night prayers in one of the dormitories? And so they took me to a dorm. And here were all these boys that were like 8 or 9 years old in their pajamas and bathrobes, kneeling by their beds in a long dormitory. And we said the prayers that Cardinal Newman had laid down to be said before the boys went to bed, and they knew them all by heart. Well, my thought was, how could mothers let their kids this age go away to a boarding school? Being in America, we just wouldn't do that. But in England, it's a thing. It's a big thing. And these kids, they were quite poised and disciplined and everything. They were just amazing. The school is doing very well. Its enrollment is holding up because it's not very far from London. And the parents of the students can come and watch their sports games in the afternoon and still go home and be home that evening. The other big Catholic schools like Stonyhurst and Ampleforth are so far away from London, it's like an 8-hour train ride to get up to those. The last thing I want to talk about is Newman as a saint. Why was he canonized? Why did he become a saint to begin with? Well, the things that impress me, his witness to the truth. He left everything, as I said, to join the Roman Catholic Church. Gave up everything he loved in life in order to go to the faith that he believed was the true faith. And he couldn't stay outside of the one true fold of the Redeemer, as he said. Also, he went through some severe trials in his life, even as a Catholic. Like me, like Bishop Vasha, he was sued. I've been in a 2-year bankruptcy suit with my diocese. He was sued for libel. And England has very strict libel laws and very severe penalties. The story was there was an ex-Catholic priest from Italy that was going around England and giving lectures against the Catholic Church. Catholic Church is corrupt, Catholic Church is evil, And Newman said, well, if you look at who's giving these talks, the man speaking to you is an ex-Catholic priest who was well known in Italy for carousing and having multiple children with multiple women and breaking his vows of celibacy and running away from one town to the next until he escaped the police and came to England. Left the priesthood, became a Protestant, and one of their chief attackers of the Catholic faith. And Newman said, this man's background is so shady, how can you believe anything he is saying? And that ex-priest sued Newman in court for libel. And Newman then had to prove in court this ex-priest's history. Well, all the witnesses and everything was in Italy, and it was very hard. He sent investigators to Italy. They met witnesses. They met women that had been wronged. But they didn't have the money and were not willing to come to England to testify in court. And the courts were very much against Catholics, very much against the Catholic priest. And even though he had some evidence, the jury voted Newman guilty of libel, and he could have gone to jail. As it was, they fined him 100 pounds, which today is like $16,000, but he had to pay all his court costs, which, as you know, are in today, our bankruptcy court costs are in the millions we've already paid. He had to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds and to pay his lawyers to defend him. And every Catholic church in England and every Catholic school put in money to help defend him, because they said it's our whole church that is on trial here. Even the Jesuits from Santa Clara University down here, the mid-19th century, Father Nobili, the first president and founder of Santa Clara, went to England and gave Newman a gift from the Jesuits of California, which was a gold nugget as big as a golf ball. They still have it over there. They showed it to me. They have it in a safe, in order to help him with his expenses. So much did the Catholic Church come to his defense. But when they asked Newman, how did you survive emotionally, spiritually, through this long trial in which you could have probably gone to jail or could have had a much higher fine? And he said, the only thing that gave me peace was praying before the Blessed Sacrament every day. I would spend time before him, from whom all peace comes, all consolation. And I knew he was there, and he was with me, and I wanted to be with him. He said, that's the only way I got through this incredible trial. Another thing, when Newman published his letter on consulting the faithful in matters of doctrine that I alluded to, some English bishops reported him to Rome as a heretic. They did an investigation behind his back. Newman was under suspicion. He was under a cloud. Newman was informed by Cardinal Manning of London that the Pope was going to make Newman a bishop, but you can't say anything. They tell you, said, oh. And then Cardinal Manning went back to the Vatican and said, don't make him a bishop because he's too liberal. He's on all these things. Meanwhile, people found out that Newman was going to become a bishop, and they started giving him gifts of croziers and miters, all the paraphernalia. And he's getting all these things, and yet no announcement came from Rome, no formal announcement, no announcement. And he didn't know that Manning went and they squashed it. So it wasn't until after Pius IX died and the new Pope, Leo XIII, came in, who had a great appreciation for Newman and saw Newman as a bridge with the modern world and also with the world of the university, and as a bridge with Protestant and other people of faith. The Pope Leo XIII made Newman, Father Newman, not Bishop Newman, made him a cardinal. And Newman says, finally, the cloud is lifted from over me. This is approval of my teachings, my writings, my theology. And it gave him enormous consolation. Not that it went to his head, but that the cloud was lifted. He was invited by many bishops in England to go with them as to the First Vatican Council. He refused them all because he was very hesitant of the decree on papal infallibility that they were drafting. As it was, the final decree, he said, I can accept this, and I think it's right. But they were planning to say that just about anything, anytime the Pope says is infallible. And he said, no, it's only when speaking ex cathedra on matters of faith and morals, it's highly restricted. And he said, I think that's true, and I can accept that. And Newman just has a great sense of balance. Whatever your theological controversy is, each side can quote him. So you got to look carefully at exactly what he's said. And like I said, the synodality thing is a great example. You can't just take part in Newman, you got to look at the whole thing. And then with the miracles, with Newman becoming a saint, this book took 30 years to write. This is the Positio Super Virtutibus. This is produced by the Oratorian Order. They hired a Jesuit professor of English literature at Fordham University, an American, to be the postulator of the cause of Cardinal Newman for sanctity. They hired him in 1961. In 1991, he finished his work. This is only one of 2 volumes, and it's why Newman had heroic virtue. And why did it take 30 years? Because he wrote so much. And each and everything that he wrote, 600 sermon manuscripts, 36 published volumes of sermons and writings, 37 volumes of letters and diaries, all had to be examined to see if there was anything heretical there or anything evil that would prevent him from being a saint. All that had to be looked at. If anything Newman said was controversial or seemed to go against the Catholic faith, they had to prove where Newman unsaid it or took it back when he became a Catholic. And very few things did he have to reverse after he became a Catholic from his Anglican days. So you're free to look at this when you come up here, but Father Vincent Blale was the postulator. He put this out, and at that point, Newman was declared venerable, by the Pope. Then, after you're declared venerable, before you become blessed, there has to be a proven miracle with no scientific explanation or medical explanation. That's why most cancer patients, if they're cured of their cancer by a miracle of a saint, it never gets approved by the Vatican, because they'll say, did you have any chemotherapy? Oh yeah, I did. No, well, it could have been the chemotherapy that cured you, or radiation, or whatever. It has to be something so extraordinary and instantaneous that it could only be a miracle. Well, that takes a long time, and in order to get that, you have to give out lots of Newman prayer cards. You've got to talk him up among people in parishes. And priests visit hospitals and people are sick. You say, do you want to pray to Cardinal Newman for your cure? Sure, I'll try anything, Father. And they put holy cards on their, part where they're suffering or whatever. That's what takes so long, because it's only right that we don't just canonize people we like, but we have to have a divine confirmation from heaven that that person is a saint in heaven. And I think that's the beauty of our canonization process. That's why often it takes so long to wait for a miracle. But it also takes devotion from the faithful to that person, that they believe you're in heaven and they're going to pray to you to ask God to cure me. That's what we do. There's a whole intercession. And so the Newman miracle for beatification, there's 2 ways we know it's a miracle. First one, is an American permanent deacon named Jack Sullivan. He had a spinal problem. The core of his spine had shrunken. He said it was supposed to be the size of a quarter, and it shrunk down to the size of a piece of string. And it was causing me enormous pain. I was in pain, and it couldn't be relieved, not with injection, surgery, whatever. He said my whole back was on fire one day, and I was in such pain, and I had the TV on in the background. And the TV was set to EWTN. And they were having a program interviewing a priest about Cardinal Newman. And they said, and the priest said, yeah, we need people that are sick to pray for a cure of Cardinal Newman. And this guy, he couldn't even see the TV, but he heard it. And he just said, Cardinal Newman, if you're a saint, please cure me, help me. And he said he felt a warmth in his back, and the warmth spread. And he felt it tingling throughout his whole body. And the pain went away. He went to his doctor, and they said there's no sign of the spinal contraction, it's gone. Jack Sullivan, I said, that's the first reason we know it's a miracle. The second reason is an inside joke, because the Oratorian fathers in England, they're very traditional. They don't believe in permanent deacons. They don't have permanent deacons in any of their churches. And not only was an American, but he was a permanent deacon. So we're saying the Lord is like poking those priests, and say, yeah, guess who I decided to cure, And he was invited by Pope Benedict XVI to be the deacon at the Mass of Beatification, and Pope Benedict went to England and beatified Cardinal Newman in a field outside of Birmingham at a huge park, after a rainy night and a beautiful morning. Well, then after you're beatified, you got to get another miracle before you can be canonized. So you got to start over. It can't be an old miracle. It's got to be a new one from the time of the beatification. This is really good. God, you got to really show us, So this one was also an American, a woman from Chicago. She was pregnant with her 5th child, but she had great complications and a lot of bleeding, as she said. She went to the doctor. There was very little they could do. Tell her to rest. She said, how can I rest? I got 5 kids that were, age 6 was the oldest, a lot of work. And one day when she was pregnant with the 5th child, she said the bleeding was very intense. It was all over my bed. I went in the bathroom. The kids were downstairs wanting their breakfast. My husband was at work. I didn't have my cell phone. I was so despondent. I just said, she had been praying to Cardinal Newman, please help me. Please help me. And her bleeding stopped. And she went to the doctor and got examined. And it was a miraculous cure. No medicine, no nothing, because there was nothing they could give her. And the baby was born naturally and healthy. And she and her husband and all those kids, those 5 kids, were the ones who brought up the gifts at the canonization Mass in 2019 to Pope Francis, the canonization Mass. Right there. So that was the second miracle. Things I brought up here, when you're beatified, they allow you to have the body of the beatified person taken out of a cemetery and put inside the church for veneration. So they went and dug up Cardinal Newman's body, which is buried in the Oratorian Cemetery outside of Birmingham, a place called Redlaw. And they had already purchased from Italy a spectacular marble sarcophagus and had it erected in the church with the top off, and they were going to put his remains in there, in a new casket and seal it up. People could come and touch it. Like you go to Mother Teresa's place in Italy and touch the marble there. Well, they dug him up, they opened the grave, and they went down, and the only thing they found was the brass plate that had been nailed to the casket with his name on it in Latin. The casket was gone. The whole body had disintegrated because the ground was all limestone. And it rains every day there. English is raining all the time. And the lime disintegrated the body and all of that. So they had no relics. There's nothing in that sarcophagus in the church. I brought here today, though, a first-class relic, part of Cardinal Newman's body, that the Oratorians gave me as a gift when I became Bishop of Oakland. Well, if there was no body, how did you get part of his body? It says, ex capilis Beatus John Henry Newman. They went in his room in the Birmingham Oratory, which when he died, they have not touched anything. From the day he died, 1890. The coal is still in the bin next to the fireplace. There is no heater in there. The bills are still on his desk. Gentlemen's hairdressers, the Cardinal Newman, 5 shillings, his receipt for his last haircut. Everything is there. Pictures of his friends he had thumbtacked on the wall, there. And they went to his sink and opened up the medicine cabinet, and they took all the hair off his hairbrush that he used. So this is some of the hair of Cardinal St. John Henry Cardinal Newman. It's the only first-class relics I have, so they're very rare. I wrote to them and said, "Can I have one for the Newman School?" And I didn't hear back, so I'm sorry. But anyway, it's the only first-class relic we have of him. I also brought his biretta and his zucchetto there that he wore as a cardinal. To close up, I have 2 cards for you here that I'd like to hand out. And, sorry. Yeah. Hey guys, can you have one to everybody of those, and then also one of these? And also these ones to every teacher. Yeah. Thanks, you guys. There's a big one and a small one. If we could look at the larger one, on the back it says, "My vocation." Most of the time when teachers, people, we go to an in-service like this and say, "What have you got for me as a takeaway, Bishop? What can I take for me and also for my students?" And of all the writings of Cardinal Newman, I like this one the best, where it says, "My vocation." Maybe you've heard this before, maybe you haven't. Where it says, "God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me which he has not committed to another. I have my mission. I never may know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next." So everybody is one of a kind. Everyone is special. Everyone has a special vocation from God. So the question to ask young people isn't, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's, what's the mission God has given you in life? Do you know what your mission is? Oh, do I have a mission? Yes, you do. How do I know it? That's the thing of discernment. Make your confirmation. Get the gift of the Holy Spirit to help you. Talk to your teachers. See where you are drawn by God to serve, not just to be served. I may never know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. Maybe you influenced some student in your class that went on to become famous and you never knew about it, but you find out about it in heaven. Maybe someone you had a casual conversation with is impressed and wants to become a Catholic like you and thus save their soul. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. God has not created me for nothing, for naught. I shall do good, I shall do his work, I shall be an angel of peace, a preacher of truth in my own place, while not intending it, if I do but keep his commandments and serve him in my calling. So we have a mission. We have a one-of-a-kind mission we each of us have from God. Therefore, I will trust him. Whatever, wherever I am, I can never be thrown away. If I'm in sickness, my sickness may serve him. In perplexity, my perplexity may serve him. If I am in sorrow, my sorrow may serve him. My sickness or perplexity or sorrow may be necessary causes of such some great end which is quite beyond us. He does nothing in vain. He may prolong my life, he may shorten it. He knows what he is about. He may take away my friends, he may throw me among strangers. He may make me feel desolate, make my spirit sink, hide the future from me. Still, he knows what he is about. We're under God's constant loving care and guidance all the time, no matter what it may seem like to us as we go along. I had a Marine when I was Marine Corps chaplain. He was diagnosed with cancer. He was 21 years old. And they couldn't cure it. He got progressively worse. But before he died, he came to me and he said, "Chaplain, I want to become a Catholic." And I said, "Oh, well, I'll give you a pamphlet on the teachings of the Catholic Church. You read that, and if you agree with it, then we can." And he goes, "Sir, I don't need no pamphlet. I want to become the religion that you and the colonel are." Because the colonel had taken care of him and took him in his own house, and the colonel's wife, the guy that didn't have a mother or father or whatever. And I said, "Okay, personal influence, the means of influencing the truth." That fellow died a year later, but all the Marines, they came to his baptism. I gave him baptism, first communion, confirmation, and anointing of the sick, all in one Mass. And he died a few months later. All the Marines came to his funeral. I don't know why God called him at such a young age, but every Marine there had an enormous influence by that kid on the Catholic faith. And this is what I want to be, and that's how I know I need this to get to heaven. And the kid said to me, after I confirmed him and everything, he goes, "Does this mean I get to have a Catholic funeral?" I said, "Yes." And I said, "Also, the gates of heaven are," this takes away everything. So we don't know why, but God has a reason, but he has a plan for us if we just put ourselves in his hand. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end.